and we pay them a little bit. And they were delighted to do it. It was a lot of fun. But direct mailing costs a lot of money. And so that's what we did, and we had to get out the vote drive and that sort of thing.
When you got to Lansing, you were assigned to the Judiciary Committee and the Rules Committee.
Well, I guess so. The Rules Committee, I remember once on one motion sending 25 resolutions to the table, all of which were asking Congress to do something, and we knew they wouldn't pay attention to it. So there was just a stupid exercise, and the whole committee agreed with me.
Do you recall your first bill?
No.
How about the first?
I don't remember. I do know in my first year, I wasn't responsible for this. The Ruthven Study Committee was, and that was making Wayne State University, and that was a big bill, and lots of people signed it, like Lucille McCullough and Jim Bradley and me, all these Wayne County guys, and I happened to be the only Republican, and we ran the show, so I was the first guy. And then I was on the final conference committee of the business activities tax. We started to, and that was a interesting deal because freshmen usually aren't put on something like that, but I had a good understanding of taxation. As a matter of fact, caught the Senate in a gross mathematical error where they multiplied a fairly large number by 0 and came out with a fairly large number. and we were able to settle this thing properly on the second conference deal.
How about some of the...
I think one of the first bills I had was on sexual criminal psychopaths. And I had a, and this came from a Soapy Williams study committee, and there were 4 bills, and the only one I got through was a central filing system, which helped in their modus operandi, and it helped in apprehending a lot of them. But eventually, I turned those over to Lucille McCullough, because I didn't want to be stuck with those things forever.
You mentioned the study committee.
Yeah.
Which is contrary, or
the
somewhat different from what's done today.
Yeah, the study committee by Soapy Williams was not a legislative study committee. It was an executive blue ribbon committee.
Oh, okay.
That he worked on, as was the Wayne State. Now, what you're talking about is what we don't have now, and we should have, because this is the constitutional way to do it. In those days, when the legislature had a problem, we either had a one-house resolution or a two-house resolution setting up a study committee, outlining the parameters of the study, perhaps putting in an appropriation, perhaps giving it the power of subpoena, telling how many members, and usually there was an odd number, and the majority party would have 4 to 3 or 3 to 2 or whatever it was. And I was fortunate enough, and I lobbied for this. In other words, you lobby within the legislature among your colleagues. And I lobbied to get on the committee for a joint study committee on K-12 education. And we could see the beginnings of the deterioration of the K-12 system that is the issue today. The absolute top issue today is what we were studying in 1955.
What were some of the things that you found?
Well, one of the things that we saw was that there was an unwritten high school agreement that the colleges would take anybody. Now, I know they didn't do that with you. That's right. Because you went to James Madison. But believe it or not, they'd take anybody, whether they graduated from high school or not, and say they're going to bring them up to speed. And one of the reasons they wanted to do that, that's the well-known Kingdom building. And that happened. But that wasn't only it. In those days, you were beginning to move away from phonics and into sight reading and the do-good stuff like self-esteem rather than earning. It's sort of wishy-washy, but nevertheless pernicious and was away from the traditional stuff, which we're getting back to today, thank God.
Less merit-driven?
Pardon me?
Less merit-driven?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Less merit-driven.
You had some Republican leaders in those days, George Van Pearson, Allison Green. Any comments on some of the
Well,
folks
yeah,
that you worked
I
with?
have a couple. My memory of Wade Van Valkenburg is that he was a good presider. Don Pierce was a good presider. Don Pierce did nothing in regards to policy. I'm not even sure that he had anything to do with committee assignments. And yet he served for Speaker for 4 years. But he was just there because Allison Green didn't want to be Speaker. He wanted to be floor leader. Allison Green was absolutely great. George Van Pearson was a leader. He got to be Speaker sort of the same way I did, by being Chairman of the Labor Committee, which is the most controversial committee of any in the legislature, and he led on issues. But Allison Green led on all issues, and was a very, very strong speaker, and I was so fortunate to be majority floor leader when Allison Green was Speaker, because he just taught me all sorts of stuff. I just love that guy. And I talk to him from time to time. Right now, he's 87 years old.
His daughter's a friend of mine. I know.
Oh, she lives in
I know
Oklahoma.
Marjorie. Yeah.
Yeah, Margaret?
Marjorie.
Marjorie, named after his wife. And yeah, and so he's just the greatest guy that I ever served with. But these are the speakers, and they're not always necessarily the leaders. Arnell Engstrom was a powerhouse in the House, and
Was he from the UP?
pardon me?
Was he from the UP?
He was Traverse City.
Okay.
And if he hadn't supported me, I don't think I could have become Speaker, even though George Romney supported me. But he and I were very close friends, and he was Chairman of the Appropriations Committee. And then Jim Folks was the Chairman of the Taxation Committee. We had a lot of good leaders all the way up and down the line. And the thing that impressed me the most about my whole career is that, well, I'll finish this. Well, I can go ahead with it. What impressed me the most is that all of us had jobs. I practiced law a lot. When I'd go home, I'd practice Friday and Saturday and Sunday, and then we'd adjourn around the 1st of June or the middle of May, and then we'd practice the rest of the year. And but all of us, except maybe a few who were retired, and they said there was a little slot in your handbook as to what your occupation was. There isn't any slot like that today. They're all legislators.
There were many farmers too, as I recall.
Well, there were quite a few farmers, and we had a lot of lawyers. And when the legislature got to be full-time, you couldn't practice law anymore, so you replaced the lawyers with teachers, which, in spite of the fact that lawyers are really a crappy group of people, they're smarter than teachers. Oh, yeah, I ain't gonna get hell for that, but they really are. And so, and we need them. In my opinion, when I was running the House, we hardly had any staff.
Yes.
And I figured that I needed 20 good lawyers in the legislature to run the place. And the lawyers that we had, guys like Jim Heitz and Dick Young and Danny Cooper and Al Kramer and Don, you know, the guy that's an appellate judge, what's his name? Anyway, he was the chairman of my judiciary, Joe Holbrook.
Holbrook?
And these lawyers, including myself, were just as competent or more competent than anybody in the Service Bureau. And we could write legislation, we could write amendments. We weren't quite as quick as doing it, but we were just as competent.
But you were truly lawmakers.
We were truly lawmakers, and we didn't have any staff to campaign for us. Ergo, we had to do the work. And the way it seems to be now is that the staff does the work, and the legislature is Now, this is a broad general statement. Do a lot of the campaigning all the time, but that's not true across the board. Of course, a lot of them work their butt off right now.